on the circumstances. So on to today's agenda. I won't speak for too much longer here. First up, we have Brian Burke, who is the Executive Director of the Nunavut Fisheries Association. So we're going to hear from him as well as Dr. Mike Smith and Stephen Adler. But Brian first. So Brian holds the position of Executive Director for the Nunavut Fisheries Association, representing Nunavut's 100% Inuit-owned commercial fishing industry. NFA members harvest over 100 million in commercial species on an annual basis and support an annual NFA-led Northern Research Program. NFA is a very long-standing member of Canada's Ocean Supercluster. I think they're one of the first members and very active, involved in our cluster. Thanks again, Brian, for all of your help and support over the years, and is also a member of the Arctic Economic Council. He will be speaking about the Nunavut fishery, the requirement for data collection and sharing. Brian?
Thank you, Susan. I'll share my screen here now. Get going. Here we go. Okay, thanks everyone for joining for this afternoon session. Going to talk a little bit about our fishery and the importance of data collection and sharing for the Nunavut industry and Nunavut in general, I guess. A little bit of background on who we are as an organization. We've been around now since 2012. Just a second now, page back up. Oh, I know. Previous. Here we go. Yeah, we were formed back in 2012, and basically to represent the common interests of our industry in Nunavut. We're 100% Inuit-owned group, owned by 4 companies. We harvest all of the shrimp and turbot allocations, which are held in Nunavut. 4 members of the association as of right now, all owned by the Inuit of the Kikitani region. We have the Arctic Fishery Alliance, Baffin Fisheries, Pangnirtung Fisheries, Cumberland Sound Fisheries, and Kikitalik Corporation. And as you see there, they're all owned by either the Hunters and Trappers Associations, by the communities, or with Kikitalik Corporation, they actually are an Inuit Birthright Corporation or owned by the Inuit of the region. These are our vessels that we have as of right now. A couple of the companies are looking at actually buying and having a couple of new vessels constructed. We have 3 mobile gear and 3 fixed gear vessels that the companies operate. One of the fixed gear vessels has actually been used for our research program every year. So what do we do as an association? Well, we represent the common interests of the industry, trying to increase our share of adjacent resources, working to maximize Inuit employment, looking at securing funding, making sure that we're consulted as an industry on all regulatory and policy issues, and trying to put together a common voice on issues with other Nunavut stakeholders. And the other big part of my time and activity is our research program. So looking at what are our priorities, developing the program, pulling the funding together, which is always a challenge, of course, and then managing the activities. So this is just a bit of background on some of the research that we've been doing over the years. We support the offshore surveys that happen in the north. We actually pay with Nunavik for 100% of the survey that's done in the Western Assessment Zone on shrimp. DFO doesn't pay anything on that one. Tracking studies with Ocean Tracking Network. We've been doing that work for many years, mostly tracking turbot, but other species as well. Have over 100 moorings and receivers in place, well over 1,000 turbot and other species tagged. New species research, we've been doing work on porcupine crab, gear technology assessments, trying to improve our gear, trying to reduce its environmental impacts, inshore test fisheries and ecosystem monitoring projects. Again, as I've said, our members are owned by the community, so we want to look at what is the potential for inshore fishery development in our communities. And we try to support any other projects that other groups may have on the go in the north as well. So for this today, I guess it's, why are we important? Why do we see data collection and sharing as important? What are our requirements? Better data leads to better information and better decision making. That's the basics. So we have a lot of challenges in the organization and in Nunavut in general. We have a huge region in the north with most of Canada's coastline. Our members are in the Kikitani region, but even there we have 13 communities and a huge coastline to cover. We're very data poor, both in our offshore and even more so in the inshore, where we have very little knowledge of what's happening or what the potential might be. You look at climate change and you look at what's happening, it's really happening in the north more extreme. It's happening earlier in the north. We're seeing a lot more change in ice. We're seeing a lot more for our members. We're seeing a lot more storms happening and more extreme events happening for our members. Costs. If you're trying to do work in the north, trying to collect data, it's very expensive. Anytime you send a vessel up there, one of our big mobile gear vessels, you're talking 60,000 a day plus just in basic costs. Data availability. Where is it? Who has it? How can we get access to it? Then such things as the privacy limitations on data. We're a small group. You've got the rule of 5, there's only 4 companies, so even our own data, getting that from DFO can be a challenge. And of course, securing long-term investment, making sure that the money is there to actually do the research, collect the data that's needed. So those are some of the, some pretty serious challenges that we're facing in the north. So what has been our approach to data collection and sharing? On the data collection side, again, our annual research program, we've been using a member vessel for a lot of the offshore work and some of the inshore work. And when we're working in communities, we try to use local vessels as much as possible. And also then supporting the development of innovative technologies. And I'll get into that in terms of why we joined the OSC. Vessels of opportunity. Basically, we have vessels that are heading north for a large part of the year, the open water season in the north. So they are available. They, as long as you're not impacting on the fishing activity, then, we'd be happy to censor them as much as anybody would like in terms of collecting data. And, and especially for our research vessel, we go beyond that. I've done reach out to various groups and, what could be the needs, what could we do? Again, for our research vessel, it's been going to the very high north, so which again is not visited that much. So what are the opportunities to collect data? And like I say, making it available to the research community. So take advantage of these northern voyages. On data sharing, again, as I mentioned, access to our own fishery data. So recently we've actually signed a data access agreement with DFO, which is going to make it a lot easier for us to get our own data back from DFO in various forms that we can then share with researchers and as needed. And then the project collaboration and partnerships, which brings us again to the OSC and why we joined that. So why did we join the OSC? We see that in its whole approach in terms of development of innovative approaches and technologies to address data challenges. So we see it as offering an opportunity to better, faster, cheaper collection of data, which again, with the costs in the north is very important. And basically it provides us with access to the best and brightest companies and minds in the country. The other big win under the OSC is the collaboration within and across the ocean sectors. It's really opened doors to new partnerships and collaboration, even within other fish companies in Canada. We didn't do projects with OCI and some of the other big companies until the OSC was put in place. And now we're working with other sectors, marine transportation, oil and gas, marine renewable sectors. So our activity to date, we are full partners on both the Ocean Vision and the Ocean DNA technology projects, and the Smart Ice Inclusive Workforce project. We're in the process of, for quite a while, development of our own major fishing project, Smarter Fishing Project, which has bring together all of the main players in the Atlantic fishing industry. And we're providing, in-kind support for a lot of other OSC projects with our vessels of opportunity. So again, if there's anything we can do in providing the vessel, collecting data, acting as platforms that, again, doesn't impact too much on the fishing activity, then we're more than happy to do that. So really what we hope to achieve through being members of the Ocean Supercluster, and again, as Susan said, we have been from very much the early days. So improve sustainable stock management for our data poor fisheries, even those that are commercial are really considered to be data poor. Our turbot, more our turbot than our shrimp, but are definitely our turbot. So right now, DFO depends largely on an annual survey, which is really a snapshot in time. Again, we're seeing changes through the climate change. So are things adjusting over time? Is that snapshot, which they try to take place the same time every year? Are you now missing things because of climate change changes in the environment? So, that snapshot, how can we build on that? So we're doing, as I mentioned, the Ocean Tracking Network, all the tracking work, which we're doing offshore and inshore throughout Nunavut, and the Ocean DNA project, where we see a lot of potential for that marrying with the tracking work and with the survey to really provide more information to help with better stock management. So we want also better understanding of the habitat we're working in, better identification of sensitive benthic areas that need to be protected. So we see the Ocean Vision technology is being developed through the project with Kraken as big help with that. Again, we look at, their very high resolution, large data capabilities as something that we can use in the future to really get up and gather the data we need. We've been, worked with DFO, worked with the NGOs in the north on protecting areas, and we know we need to do more there, but we want to make sure we're protecting the right areas, the areas that are sensitive, that have those the benthic habitat that needs to be protected. So, this through technology, through innovation, we see that being successful. Better, more sustainable fishing practices. So we're hoping through our bigger project to use technologies combined with artificial intelligence, machine learning, so that we can improve our harvesting, reduce the bycatch of species, reduce the environmental impacts, improve our viability, again, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions because we'll have use less fuel as we harvest. And again, the last one there is access to more and better data and knowledge through collaboration on data collection and sharing. And that's really, a big thing that came out of this Ocean Supercluster, and we keep building on it. And I keep getting contacted by various groups who are, have great technologies and, can offer a lot to what we need to do in the north in terms of addressing the challenges that we do have. I believe that's it. So it's a quick go through of where we're to in terms of of data collection and sharing, and how important it is to us as an industry and to the North.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Really appreciate that. Quite a lot of detail in there. And I forgot to mention before we kicked off, so we do have a couple of minutes for questions. And so if you want to pop them into the chat, we'll have a breakout session after this set of presentations. But if you want to pop them into the chat, and you may not get a chance to write it down before I go on to the next speaker since I didn't give you enough warning, but we might come back to that after the end of the next speaker, assuming, Brian, you're going to be sticking around for at least another little while. So, we'll just give it a couple seconds here to see if anything pops up. And if not, we'll move on to the next speaker. Okay, while we're waiting just to see if any questions come in, I just wanted to give you an FYI on a slight change in the agenda. So after our third keynote speaker, versus a speaker recap and a kind of a break and then going into the breakout session, we're going to do a bit more of an exercise real time using Mentor, sorry, I can't remember the exact tool that we're using, but it's a bit of a real time kind of survey that we're going to do. So just a slight change in the agenda. So that'll be right after the third speaker and right before the break. Okay, I think it looks like we've got one question from Kirk. Hi, Kirk. Brian, has any fishing company considered installing a multi-beam mapping system for surveying their fishing areas?
Yes, I think it's been, then I guess we had discussions with Kirk over time in terms of on our research vessel, something that really never did get put in place. But we're hoping now, as I mentioned, I know two of our companies are in the process of looking at building new vessels, and we're expecting that those new vessels will have the full, most updated technology, including multi-beam surveying. Right? So we're hopeful in the future to build on that for sure.
Oh, another one coming in from Christina. Have you had any interactions with the Polar Data Catalog, the public metadata and data repository for ArcticNet?
Very little, to be honest with you. We did support a project fairly recently looking at what's been done in terms of research in some of the high Arctic communities. We were kind of the sponsor for a project with DFO. So I know that, believe that was looked at then in terms of, what ArcticNet projects had been done in the North, in some of these high Arctic communities. But yes, I think that's something, it's how do we bring all this together, the data we're gathering, the data ArcticNet and all other groups are gathering, so we know, especially where our focus now, a lot of our focus going forward is going to be on inshore and gathering data and doing work in the inshore in our communities. So that's something that's become, because we know that there's been a lot of projects done in the North through ArcticNet. So what data files, what data is out there that could potentially help us as we look at, looking at inshore fishery and the ecosystem near our inshore communities.
Okay, great, thanks. We're going to move on to the next speaker now. So we have with us Dr. Mike Smith, project lead for CIOOS Atlantic and associate professor at Dow. So Mike Smith is an award-winning teacher and researcher studying the impact of technology in people's lives. He has a long history of connecting ocean researchers to best practices in managing data through research and service in organizations including CIOOS, OFI, and MEOPAR. He will be speaking about Schrodinger's data, why your data is worthless and priceless at the same time, I'm sure in his very insightful and quippy manner as usual. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here and loving this conversation and the previous two sessions. I am going to talk about Schrodinger's data. So if you haven't heard of it, Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment where Schrodinger imagines as a proxy for understanding quantum physics that a cat is both alive and dead in a box at the same time. And I think the first thing that tells us is Schrodinger didn't really love cats, because he could have done that with any animal. Like, it could have been Schrodinger's mosquito, but no, he went for cats. And I think that says something about Schrodinger. It also says that he understood cats, because every time I put my cat in a box, she has no problem finding her way out, like cats in boxes. But anyway, Schrodinger was very specific and said it had to be a steel box, which is a level of specificity that suggests he thought too much about putting cats in boxes. But the reason I want to talk about Schrodinger's cat is because when we think about our data, it has both enormous value and little value at the same time. And I think there's two things that drive this dual identity of our data that's important to our understanding, right? And the first is, I want to illustrate with an example. So what you see here is people throwing an Argo float into the ocean. And these are autonomous buoys that bob through the ocean, taken hither and yon by the currents. They pop up every 10 days to send their data via satellite, but they're collecting massive amounts of data. Well, an individual float is collecting a large amount of data, but about a really small point in the ocean, and that point moves around the ocean. So it doesn't even really give me a sense of what's happening in a specific place over time. It's just what it encounters. And so the data in this float is actually quite valueless, right? I don't know that you could take the data from a single Argo float, no matter how much of it you had, and sell it to anyone for any purpose. But the value of the Argo program is that there's thousands of these floats, and they're paid for by different actors in different countries. And so when you take all of these and put them together, you're able to build a picture of the ocean that's more elaborate and more detailed than anything that we've had before. And it's done remarkable things for our ability to forecast severe weather events, to understand hurricanes, to predict weather just in general, with great specificity for location in a really distributed way. And so while one Argo float doesn't have value, it's also quite priceless, right? Because it's part of this large network. And I think that that's illustrative, because if I imagine data coming into an organization, we have a little arrow here where you're collecting your data and putting it into your database. That data can be used for a lot of purposes that create value, right? It might inform decisions, which is kind of hard to put a dollar figure on. You might be able to sell it as a data product. So you might have a data as a service offering, or you might be able, it might be a core part of your business that you collect data and make it available to others in easy to use packages. But in addition to these kind of primary uses, there is potential for that data to be part of something bigger. And so the data that you're holding or collecting might also help improve forecasts. It might be used by startups, by an AI startup maybe, who's trying to do something really interesting in the ocean space, or be part of the grounds for a strategic partnership. And some of these things, it's easy to put a value on, right? I make a data product, I sell it for X dollars, I sell Y of them, that's what it's worth to me. The value that you get by improving ocean forecasts is harder to quantify, right? Because you're only a small part of the input, and the output benefits you, but in a way that's really hard to register in a balance sheet. And so the data, whether it's coming to you directly or whether it's creating value indirectly, it's really hard to measure that data. And in fact, we're having this conversation with a number of organizations right now. How do you put a value, a dollar sign, next to the data that you have? And we're finding that no one really has an amazing way to do that, right? How does data show up in the balance sheet? We have this intuitive sense that it's good for us, and if we have more of it, we'll be better off. But it's really hard to say that this is what this data does for me. We know we have a sense of what it costs. We know what it costs to go out there and collect the data, but once we get it out in our hands and either use it internally only, or once we start sharing it with others, it's hard to put a dollar value on that. There's another dimension to which data is both invaluable and worthless, right? It's this idea of data hoarding. So this is actually not for my office, though it could be. Mine was too messy to actually show you. But the idea is that there's stacks of paper, and that somewhere in this paper there's essential information, and that's why I don't just toss the whole lot of it. But its value is really diminished in that it would be hard for me to put my hands on it. And on the run of a day, even though my stack of paper is 1.5 feet deep, I'm really only interacting with the top couple pieces of paper. That's where my current value is coming from. And so again, this image is just less interesting when it's digital because it's just a hard drive, right? Like hard to see structure on a hard drive. But with this analogy, right, we do the same thing with our data, right? That as much as we're collecting our live data or our current data or active data, however you want to think of it, we're mostly using that data to inform our decisions and create our data products. It's the current data that's of interest. And if we think over time, if we go back over time to the data that we're storing that we're actually not finding value from, there could be potential value in that data that could be unlocked for all of the same reasons I identified as before that don't impact that original data. But again, when I'm not doing that, this data is something that has high potential value, but at the moment it's quite worthless because it's just sitting there static and not being seen by anyone and not being used by me. And it takes effort to get it out of here and into some of these other places. And so it's sometimes hard to have that conversation, right? How do you articulate the value when whether it's direct or indirect of making this data available to others? And there's even models where you can take some of this live data or the current data and put it into some kind of secure platform, like a data trust, and allow people in limited ways to use even the data that's most valuable to you because you know they're not competing. And what does it hurt you if an AI researcher is playing with your current data, or if researchers are using it to study things that aren't directly relevant to you, or perhaps that are directly relevant to you? They're not competing in that same space. And so as we try to articulate how do we figure out if our data is of enormous value or worthless, we do know from experience that when you take data and make it open, you can get some kind of aggregate dollar value across the economy. And these are just 8 different consulting firms and their estimates of the value of the economic benefits of open data to Europe when they launched an open data initiative. But it's really hard to get at what does this value mean for me and my organization today or next year or in this fiscal year. And in part, that's something we're going to have to grapple with as we enter this transition, right? Where we're getting from data is rare and it must be protected and I can't let anyone have it and we're going to compete on data, to a world where there is a ton of data and data is grounds for relationships, right? And instead of talking about open data, we should be talking about open relationships. Wait, no, that's not a great term. I'm going to come up with a better term than open relationships, because if I keep sending emails about open relationships, I'm going to have some difficult conversations with my wife. But we will come up with a better term for that, because it's not just about shipping data. I think that there's lots more that we can do together, because no one really has a complete understanding of what's happening even in a small region of the ocean. And we need to work together to avoid wasting this data to unlock the value from it. So that's my quick spiel on how we unlock the data. We do have a project underway, involves OECD, NOAA, CIOOS, The Economist, World Ocean Initiative, and led by the Ocean Frontier Institute and The Economist, as we try to put a dollar figure on this. And if you're interested in that, I'd encourage you to reach out to us. And if you're interested in talking about how to make some of this data more broadly available, we're always happy to talk at CIOOS, but my research has me thinking about this an awful lot. And thanks for taking the time to listen to me today.
Great, thank you very much. We'll do the same routine this time. Give everyone maybe just a minute to see if there's any questions that come in. Okay. And maybe just a pre-warning that we'll also do Q&A for the next speaker as well. So our third and final speaker for today is Stephen Adler, who's CEO of Ocean Data Alliance. Welcome, Stephen. The Ocean Data Alliance had its launch at the United Nations and is working on business solutions to critical ocean challenges. Prior to the Ocean Data Alliance, Stephen was IBM's Chief Data Strategist and member of the IBM Academy of Technology Leadership team. He helped invent Internet insurance and the data governance industry, and has served on the U.S. Commerce Department Data Advisory Council, NY Civil Liberties Board of Directors, and was co-chair of industry standards committees at W3C and OASIS. He will be speaking about a digital ocean transformation. Stephen, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for the invitation to participate. How do we advance the slides? That's the first question I have. Can I do that, or do you do that? You do that. Great. Did you do that?
That's correct, Stephen. Lydia Ross here. If you just say next slide, then I'll advance those for you.
Good. Let's do next slide. So first, a little background. Mike, really enjoyed your presentation. I'll try to address that value of data question that you posed to us later in the chart, later in the deck. First, I want to say we're talking about the ocean. We don't know a lot about it. 95% of its life forms are so far unmapped. Vast amounts of ocean space is unmapped. Yet marine scientists around the world collect large amounts of data today, as they have been doing since marine science was first invented about 65 years ago. 95% of all ocean sensors are analog. They have to be calibrated every time they're put in the water. Their calibrations vary widely. You can have the same sensor in different places and they're different calibrations, and that means the data that's collected can be different, which means normalizing the data is quite a challenge. Most of the ocean data that's collected does not have any of the names of the people who collected associated with it. You can't find scientists in ocean data catalogs. You can't find the captain of the ship. You can't find the crew that helped to build the materials that go onto the ship. You can't find any human context whatsoever about the data that's collected, which is difficult unless you happen to know the mission that went out, because maybe it was at your institution. Or maybe you know the marine scientist because you heard about it anecdotally, or you read the paper and you can associate the paper with the data. But these things aren't linked in the data records themselves. South of the equator, very few nations have marine science institutions that collect a lot of data. So most of the marine science institutions are run by academics in the Northern Hemisphere. We survey the ocean episodically, heroically, at great expense. We send out ships, we send people out to a point in the ocean for a brief period of time. They collect a lot of data and they bring it back, and then they store it in their desk, on their laptop, in a server. And the longer time goes by, the less the likelihood is that that data will ever be shared publicly outside of their institution. So we have a vast amount of data that's been collected by marine science for decades, and very little of it is shared in the open. Those that is shared, the data that is shared is often shared in non-standard ways. It seems that marine science has not yet adopted widespread open data catalogs. Many scientific institutions publish data behind a registration portal, requiring you to disclose upfront who you are, why you want to use it, and what purpose you're going to use it for. Some even publish their data on FTP servers. Most marine science institutions don't have any master data management or data governance, and certainly very little cloud in general. I bring all this up because that's the state of data collection today in the marine science world. Next chart, please. But outside of data collected on missions, marine scientists and people who love the ocean share data almost instantaneously with their friends and peers when they collect it, like this photo that I took the other day, or this post that Lucy Woodall posted about some work she did in the Comoros Islands. And that's what's fascinating, is that whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or any one of a number of other social media platforms, marine scientists love to share data instantly. Why? because there's a reward for sharing data in these platforms. There's a dopamine effect of being liked for the data that you share. And so they share it. But there is no similar reward for people to share data collected on missions. And so they don't. Next slide. And of course, they hoard that data. This is a paper published in Nature recently that says that the longer the data sits unpublished, the less likely it is for anybody to ever see it. And we know that marine scientists, for example, rarely ever consult other marine scientists who could have been on a similar mission in a similar part of the world just a few years ago, because it's too difficult to get the data. In fact, large numbers of marine scientists complain that a lot of the times they spend trying to access data from other marine science institutions requires them to do vast amounts of search and vast amounts of normalization. Even then, the data is of limited value. So we have a data collection and a data governance problem in marine science today. And it stems from an incentive problem. Next chart. Scientists are measured on papers that they publish. Much of marine science collects data through publicly funded projects. And most of the funding coming from the United States or Canada or the European Union requires that data collected on publicly funded projects gets published in the open. But oftentimes, at least the United States and Europe, and I'm not sure about Canada, the way that that data is supposed to be published is not specified, or the time frame. But scientists will get money and recognition and job security from publishing papers. If they got the same benefits from publishing data, they would be just as eager to publish data from missions as soon as this was collected as they are when they publish to Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. Next slide. Now here's an example of how recognition and incentive structures benefit employees. I worked at IBM for 23 years, and IBM is the #1 producer of patents in the world for 20 years running. Nothing to do with me whatsoever. IBM has a patent publication system in place. We have a team of lawyers that work with industry professionals to take their ideas and turn them into inventions that can be patented. We have an internal reward system that rewards employees financially and with recognition and with peer acknowledgement. Every time they file a patent, we have patent plateaus. You get 4 patents, you get a patent plateau. You get 8, you get a patent plateau. You get 20 or 25, you become a master inventor. And these recognitions are not just internal to the company, they're public. We create badges that we allow our employees to publish on LinkedIn celebrating their latest patent plateau that they've reached. And this system works. It works extremely well. It motivates employees. I was not a technical employee. I was a marketing and sales professional. I filed 4 patents. I mean, it's so effective that people outside the technical community will file patents for their inventions because they know that it's rewarded. If we had a similar type of reward system for marine scientists to publish their data in open data catalogs, we would see a similar type of behavior. We would no longer be questioning, we would no longer be discussing why do we have such a difficult time getting open data out of marine scientists. It'd be a thing of the past. Next chart. I believe all ocean data collected should be attributed to the scientists that collect it. Furthermore, everybody who worked on the mission should be attributed in the data that was collected. The people who designed the robots and gadgets that we stick in the water should be attributed. If you're publicly funded to do a marine science project and you're willing to put your name on a paper that you publish in a journal, you should also be willing to put your name on the data. And the more interesting, the more data we have about the scientists who collect the data, the easier it is to go back to the scientist and validate what happened on the mission. I'm having difficulty normalizing it. What did you do to this data? And to have those kinds of conversations. Also, it becomes easier and easier to recognize the scientists for the types of data that they collect. We should be thinking about how to reward scientists around the world for the data they collect by keeping a tally, by keeping a list of all the data that they contribute from all the missions that they've run. Next chart. And that's my idea. In the semantic web, this idea from Tim Berners-Lee that all data should be linked like URLs, we should be able to recognize not only the data from the mission and the scientist. I have to go to the next chart to complete this thought. Next chart. But all the things that we stick in the water. Go ahead, next chart. I want to draw on a real world analogy for this. Back in 2013, the city of Palo Alto, go to the next chart. The city of Palo Alto did an inventory of its trees. And they did it from an asset management perspective. And they assigned every tree an IRL, an internet resource locator. That's like a URL, but it's a locator for a thing, not a website. And by doing that, they were able to record all kinds of information about each tree: the genus, the age, the width, the type of tree. But also, they allowed citizens to record things about the tree that they experienced. Maybe they dated under the tree, or maybe they swung on the tree, or maybe they climbed the tree. And in Melbourne, where this idea was picked up from Palo Alto, people wrote poems to the tree. And in a way, what they did was they had all these different perspectives about what the tree meant to them. Go back one chart. All around the world, in the ocean, there aren't trees, but there are coral reefs, and there are seamounts, and there are deserts. And all of those places in the ocean could have an IRL, so that we could begin to record all of the data and all of the missions that survey all the different spots from today, from the past 65 years to today, and for the next 65 or 650 years. So that the ocean becomes a part of our network. And we can record the things we observe about it with defined places that have defined internet resource locators that anybody can contribute to. And that's why I believe that the next generation of ocean data goes far beyond just the collection of mission data to the recording of mission data to specific things where we identify them in the ocean and plant a flag, if you will, an IRL, like a tree, linked to the scientists who do the work, linked to the people who might use the data, linked to a whole, no, I can't say use the data, because then we go next chart. Next one. And here's why. Data is not a traditional asset. Its value is not based on scarcity like gold or oil. I can have a copy, you can have a copy, billions of people can have a copy. Its value is based on what in economics is called utility theory, which is the consumer preference for a good, which means its value is purely transactional. It only generates value when people use it. It has zero value sitting on a server, difficult to reach, unutilized. In fact, data sitting on a server that no one uses is a sunk IT cost. That is, it is negative value. It is hurting an organization. When I was, a few years ago, I served on the US Commerce Department Data Advisory Council, and we did an estimate with the Bureau of Economic Analysis with some economists on the value of US Commerce Department data if it could all be published and shared with the American public. We estimated that that data could generate between 1% and 3% of additional GDP growth to the United States. That's $900 to $3 trillion a year in additional value. That's not sale value of the data. That is the exponential multiplier effect of sharing the data with the private and public sector, who can figure out new products to develop and monetize the value through its greater utility. Because the more the data is shared, the more people can use it. Next chart. You see, the reason for that is that even in the largest institutions, you're always limited by the brain power you have. So what are the biggest institutions? They have 600 marine scientists. There are 7 billion people on the planet. And 7 billion people will always find new uses for the data that 600 scientists can never imagine. And that's the value of open data. By making it publicly available for billions of people to use for any purpose without permission, they will find new ways to use it. And the value that they generate comes back to the government, to the citizens, through jobs and tax revenue and productivity. And that's the purpose of open data. It's to stimulate growth. And what we have to do in the ocean community is teach others that open data is a thing. It's been around for a decade now. It has 70 countries doing it. It has thousands of cities doing it, and they're generating huge amounts of growth and productivity from publishing it. There are open data catalogs that are open source, CCAN and DCAN. There are private companies like Socrata and Open Data Soft that provide proprietary solutions. There are lots of solutions and lots of consultants and lots of experts to help. Most of the time, the open data that's published is never accessed by humans. If you go to the group on Earth observations, they have a huge geospatial data catalog, and they get something like 6 million hits a month on their catalog. 95% of those hits are machine to machine. They're API access, because those are apps that are consuming the data, using Geo as a convenient portal to link to federated data sets all around the world. That's how open data is used, machine to machine. Next chart. I challenge marine science to step up, to join the rest of the world doing open data. I'd like to see all ocean creatures and places have their own IRLs linked to data sets and people and ships and subs and robots and things we stick in the water. We should be looking for millions of ocean data sets linked around the world, not one. We don't need one thing. One thing is a single point of success and a single point of failure. We need institutions around the world to be doing their own open data innovations, competing with each other to provide the most data fastest. Data collected about the ocean should be shared the moment it's collected. And it shouldn't be shared on a portal that requires registration, and they shouldn't be tracking uses. It should be available for everyone to use for any purpose, and our goal should be to stimulate creativity and innovation and growth. Last chart. In the EU, they see this vision. They've already announced something called the EU Ocean Digital Twin, which they believe will result in IRLs being planted around the world. They're beginning in the Arctic to create a digital twin of the ocean so that it can be understood and the data can be processed in massive computational simulations. I brought these charts together to be a little provocative and to stimulate some conversation, and I hope that I've succeeded, and I welcome your questions and comments. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Great, thank you very much, Stephen. We'll stand by, see if anything comes in here. And maybe while that's happening, just a quick comment. So the Ocean Supercluster initiative, I mean, you're speaking about needing an incentive, right? And you spoke primarily from the academic scientific perspective, but we're seeing this come through in projects now a bit too. We have an incentive by means of having data exchange be a contribution to the strength of a project in an application. But it's not just that. It's the relationships. Like, people want to collaborate together. They want to start, doing business together. So they get their heads around what a project is all about. And lo and behold, they find if they each contribute, a certain amount of money and to collect the same amount of data and share it amongst each other, they save a ton of money, right? And so there's an inherent financial incentive to collaborating that we're starting to see emerge on some of the project activity that's come through. Not all of it, it's not entirely relevant sometimes, but coming back to that incentive piece, it could be, the need to get recognized. It could be the need to belong to a consortium, right? Or the need to want to do a project. It really does come down to, what's driving you to share that data. And there's more than one reason to want to do that. I'm not seeing any questions come in. Oh, yes, there is. Thanks, Stephen, from Mark Plowman. Hi, Mark. How would you compare the quest for ocean data to something like our meteorological systems?
With regards to weather data, since I think it was 2009, the United States has been providing weather data for free. And back in the Commerce Department, we did an analysis of the value of free weather data to the US economy. And we estimated that it generates about $650 billion a year in additional GDP growth. That's because the weather data that's collected by NOAA and provided for free on data.gov, which is the US government's data repository, is used by 11 or 12 different private weather companies who all use their own forecasting engine. So they take the raw data and they combine it with data that they collect, along with algorithms that they've developed, create derivative works, and they sell those derivative works, and those get used by different industries to do different things. Trucking companies use it to plan their trucking routes, and airplanes use it to plan their routes. And all told, we did this estimate that it generates about $650 billion, which is something like 10 times what NOAA was generating in revenue from selling the data prior to that. And that was the business case that was worked on to justify, or to, it was actually a historical analysis of how did open weather data impact the US economy 6 years after it was first done. And I think you could probably make the same type of a guess on what would ocean data do for the Canadian or the US economy if it was all provided in the open through open data sharing.
All right, and then I guess Mike's got a nice comment there. Fun fact, ocean data is an essential input to weather forecasting, but we so rarely give the credit to oceanographers. All right. Any other questions, guys? Okay, well, couldn't have been better timing. We're right on time. Thank you very, very much, Stephen, as well as Mike and Brian. Really appreciate your time and the information you provided today, and also appreciate the questions coming in from the audience.